The Veltharian homeworld was dying. Their beautiful crystal cities, which had sparkled like diamonds under their twin suns for thousands of years, now stood empty and dark. The once proud crystalline beings huddled in their deepest underground chambers, listening to the terrible sounds above as the void devourers tore through their outer defenses. Elder Kixthan's crystalline form flickered with desperate energy as he studied the ancient texts spread before him. These scrolls had been locked away for millennia, considered too dangerous to use, but with their entire civilization facing extinction, desperate times called for desperate measures. The texts spoke of legendary protectors who could be summoned in times of great need, beings of incredible power who would answer the call of those facing certain doom. "Are you certain about this, Elder?" whispered Velmora, her crystal body trembling with fear. The old writings warn of great risks. Kixthan's light dimmed with exhaustion. "Look around us, child. Our people are dying. Our world burns. What greater risk could there be than doing nothing?" The ceremony required 12 crystal beings to form a perfect circle. Each one held a fragment of their world's core, pulsing with the life force of their dying planet. As they began the ancient chant, their voices harmonized in frequencies that made the very air shimmer. The ritual chamber filled with blinding light as dimensional energy crackled between their forms. But something went wrong. Instead of opening a gateway to summon mythical guardians, the ritual tore a massive hole in space itself. The dimensional rift screamed across the galaxy, broadcasting their desperate plea for help on frequencies that no one had used for millions of years, thousands of light years away. Admiral Park Ji-won was reviewing supply reports at Luna Station when every alarm in the facility began screaming. The massive communication array that monitored deep space had detected something unprecedented, signals so powerful it nearly burned out their receivers. "Sir, you need to see this," called out Lieutenant Choi Ji-ho, his fingers flying across the control panel, receiving what appears to be a distress call, but it's unlike anything in our databases. Park moved to the main display screen, her eyes widening as the translation program worked to decode the message. The desperation in the alien voices was unmistakable, even across the language barrier. Images of a dying world, a peaceful people under attack, and a plea for anyone who could hear them to come to their aid. Admiral Ji-ho said quietly, "The signal originated from the outer rim. According to our star charts, that sector is completely unexplored." Park studied the data streaming across her screens. In all of humanity's expansion into space, they had never encountered another intelligent species. And now, when they finally made contact, it was with a civilization crying out for help as they faced extinction. What the Veltharians didn't know was that their accidental summoning had reached the one species in the galaxy that every other race whispered about in fear: the humans of Earth. Survivors of a world so dangerous that most aliens couldn't believe intelligent life had evolved there at all. The crystalline beings had asked for legendary protectors, were about to get exactly what they wished for. Admiral Park Ji-won stood in the command center of Luna Station, staring at the alien distress signal that had just changed everything. The desperate voices echoing through the translation system hit her harder than any military briefing ever had. These weren't just radio signals or data packets. These were real people, somewhere out there in the darkness, begging for someone to save them. "Admiral Earth's command is requesting immediate consultation," reported Lieutenant Choi Ji-ho, his voice tense with excitement and worry. "They want a full analysis before any action is taken." Park knew the protocols by heart. First contact situations required months of careful planning, extensive committee reviews, and approval from at least 7 different government agencies. But as she listened to the alien voices growing weaker with each transmission, she realized they didn't have months. They might not even have days. "Ji-ho, patch me through to Captain Kim Min-ho on the Defiance," she ordered. "And get me Commander Lee Sora from the battle group." Within minutes, the holographic images of her 2 most trusted officers appeared before her. Captain Kim, a veteran of the Mars conflicts, looked as serious as always. Commander Lee, brilliant and decisive, was already pulling up star charts on her personal display. "I know what you're thinking, Admiral," Kim said before she could speak, "and I agree. Those people don't have time for our bureaucracy. Lee nodded, her fingers dancing. Across the tactical display, the signal is coming from a region we've never explored. It's at least a 6-day journey at maximum hyperspace speed. If we're going to help them, we need to leave now. Park felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She was about to commit humanity's entire space fleet to help complete strangers in direct violation of multiple Earth command protocols. But as another wave of alien distress calls filled the command center, she knew there was really no choice at all. Jiho, start the fleet mobilization sequence, she ordered. I want every available ship ready for hyperspace jump within 2 hours. Earth Command will have our heads for this, Jiho warned. Though his fingers were already working to execute the orders. Let them, Park replied. History will judge us by what we do next, not by whether we followed the proper paperwork. Captain Kim's image straightened with military precision. The Defiance and her escort group can be ready in 90 minutes. We'll take point and establish a safe corridor for the main fleet. Commander Lee was already coordinating with her battle group commanders. Admiral, I'm reading energy signatures in that alien signal that suggests weapons technology far beyond anything we've seen. Whatever's attacking these people, it's not going to be a simple rescue mission. Of course, her screens. The alien energy readings were unlike anything in human databases, suggesting technology that operated on completely different principles than Earth science. But more importantly, the distress signals were getting weaker by the hour. Then, we'll adapt, she said firmly. Humanity has always been good at that. As alarms began sounding throughout Luna Station, signaling the fleet mobilization, Park realized they were about to make history. This wasn't just humanity's first contact with alien life. This was their chance to prove that Earth's children could be more than just survivors. They could be protectors. The Veltharian crystal monitoring stations began picking up the approaching human fleet 3 days before they arrived. At first, science coordinator Velmora thought her instruments were malfunctioning. The biosignatures she was detecting seemed impossible for any intelligent species. Elder Kixton, she called urgently, her crystalline form flickering with alarm. The beings responding to our call. There's something very wrong with their readings. The Elder approached the scanning station, his ancient crystal body creaking softly. What do you mean, child? Velmora's trembling appendage pointed at the display screen. Their biological signatures indicate they come from a world with crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, and extreme temperature variations. No thinking species could evolve under such conditions. As more data flowed in from the deep space sensors, the situation became even more alarming. The computer systems began automatically categorizing the incoming being's homeworld, and the results made every Veltharian in the command center freeze with terror. Class 12 Deathworld, the computer announced in its calm, mechanical voice. Planet designation, Earth. Survival probability for standard galactic species, 0%. Getch, immediate evacuation of all personnel. Elder Kixton felt his crystal heart skip a beat. In all his centuries of studying galactic databases, he had never encountered a Class 12 classification. Most worlds dangerous enough to earn a Class 5 rating were considered uninhabitable. Class 8 worlds were used as prison planets for the galaxy's worst criminals, but Class 12, that was beyond the scale of what any rational mind could imagine. Show me the planetary data, he whispered. The screen filled with information that made no sense. Earth's gravity was nearly twice what most species could survive. The atmosphere contained a gas so reactive it caused metal to rust and organic matter to burn. The planet's weather systems included storms that could level cities, frozen precipitation that could kill exposed beings in minutes, and temperature swings that ranged from boiling to freezing. But that wasn't the worst part. The planet was covered in life forms that existed solely to kill and eat other life forms. Creatures with massive teeth, venomous stingers, and predatory instincts. The oceans teemed with monsters that could swallow entire ships. Even the plant life was dangerous, with some species that could dissolve flesh on contact. How is this possible? Velmora asked, her voice barely a whisper. How could intelligent beings evolve on such a world? The answer came as the computer finished its analysis of human biology. These weren't just survivors of a death world. They were perfectly adapted to it. Their bodies contained a transport system that used the same corrosive gas that made their atmosphere deadly. Their bones were dense enough to function under crushing gravity. Their immune systems were designed to fight off countless diseases and toxins. Most terrifying of all, their brains had evolved to treat constant danger as normal. Where other species would collapse from stress, humans seemed to thrive on it. Elder Velmora said urgently, "What have we done? The Void Devourers are mindless destroyers, but these... These are thinking predators from a world that taught them to kill or be killed every single day." Kix then stared at the approaching fleet, realizing the horrible truth. Their desperate ritual had worked exactly as intended. They had called for legendary protectors, beings of incredible power who could save them from extinction. The problem was, it never considered that the greatest protectors might also be the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Captain Kim Min-ho stepped onto the bridge of the UES Defiance as they entered Veltharian space. The first thing that struck him was how beautiful it was. Crystal formations the size of moons orbited a dying star, each one glowing with soft rainbow light. But even from this distance, he could see the dark scars where something had torn. Through their outer defenses, "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," reported Communications Officer Park Haijin. "The aliens want to establish direct contact." Kim nodded, straightening his uniform. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing Elder Kixton's crystalline form. The alien's light pulsed nervously as he spoke through the translation system. "Greetings, beings from the Deathworld Earth. We're grateful you answered our call, though we must admit we are somewhat afraid." Kim couldn't help but smile. "Don't worry, Elder. We're here to help, not hurt." "My name is Captain Kim Min-ho of the Earth United Fleet. You came so far just to help strangers?" Kixton asked, his crystal body flickering with amazement. "Your databases must have told you we have nothing to offer in return. Sometimes helping is its own reward," Kim replied simply. "Now, tell us about these Void Devourers." As the conversation continued, Kim found himself fascinated by the aliens' reactions. Every time he mentioned something routine about Earth life, the Veltharians seemed to grow more terrified. When he casually mentioned that Earth had hurricanes that could level cities, Kix the Nest light dimmed with shock. "You mean your weather systems actively try to kill you?" the Elder asked in disbelief. "Well, not exactly try," Kim laughed. "Yeah, we get some pretty rough storms. Nothing too serious if you're prepared for them." Meanwhile, Commander Lee Sora was working with Science Officer Bae Sunmi in the ship's tactical center, gathering intelligence on their enemy. The Veltharians had provided detailed files on the Void Devourers, and what they found was both fascinating and disturbing. "They're a hive mind species," Bae explained, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. "No individual thought, just pure consumption. They strip entire star systems of all matter and energy, then move on to the next." Lee studied the tactical data. "How do they usually attack?" "According to the Veltharians, they just overwhelm with numbers," Bae replied. "Most species either flee or surrender immediately. The few that try to fight are usually destroyed within hours." What surprised Lee most was how the Veltharians reacted to their tactical discussions. When she mentioned that humanity had developed strategies for fighting superior numbers, the aliens watched in fascination. When Bae casually noted that humans had been dealing with predators and natural disasters for their entire evolutionary history, the crystalline being seemed amazed. "You speak of survival as if it's simple," Velmora observed through the communication. "Link, on our world, we never had to fight for anything. Food grew from crystal formations. Our weather was always perfect. We never had predators or diseases." "That sounds nice," Lee admitted. "But it also means you never had to learn how to fight back." "You did?" Kixton asked. Lee and Bae exchanged glances. "Every day," Lee said. "On Earth, if you don't fight, you don't survive. It's taught us to be creative when we're outnumbered." As the briefing continued, the Veltharians began to understand why the humans seemed so calm about facing an enemy that had terrified entire star systems. These weren't just warriors. They were survivors from a world that had spent millions of years teaching them that there was always a way to win. No matter how impossible the odds seemed, The aliens had summoned protectors. What they got were problem solvers who treated galactic extinction events like Tuesday morning challenges. Admiral Park Ji-won stood before the massive holographic display in the fleet's command center, watching as the tactical computers built a three-dimensional model of the Void Devourer threat. Around her, officers from every ship in the human fleet studied the data with the kind of focused intensity that had made Earth's military legendary. "All right, people," Park announced. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The hologram shifted too. "Show the enemy's previous attacks." Massive swarms of biomechanical ships descended on star systems like locusts, stripping away everything in their path. Planets, moons, even entire stars were consumed and converted into more ships for the hive mind. Collective. Major Han Wujin, the fleet's strategic warfare specialist, leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Well, that's interesting. You're basically space locusts with a bad attitude." The Veltharian observers in the room flickered with shock at his casual tone. Elder Kix the Nest's crystalline form pulsed with disbelief. "Major, these creatures have destroyed 17 different civilizations. How can you be so calm?" Han looked up from his datapad with a grin. "Elder, with respect, this is just Tuesday with higher stakes. We've been dealing with swarm tactics since before we invented the wheel." Commander Lee Sora pulled up historical data on her personal display. "The Major's right. Humans have faced overwhelming numbers before. Locust swarms that could cover entire continents. Army ant colonies that could strip forests bare. Even our own species when resources got scarce." Science Officer Bae Sunmi added her analysis to the main display. "The Void Devourers operate on pure consumption instinct. Creativity, no adaptation, just raw numbers. That's actually their weakness." "Weakness?" Velmora's voice crackled through the communication system. "They have consumed entire star systems. Against species that either ran away or tried to fight them head-on," Park explained. "But look at their attack patterns. They're completely predictable. They always hit the same targets in the same order using the same formations." Captain Kim Minho joined the discussion from his position near the tactical display. "It's like fighting a computer virus. Dangerous if you don't know how to handle it. But once you understand the pattern, you can write a defense." The human officers began discussing countermeasures with the kind of enthusiasm most species reserve for discussing favorite foods. They talked about flanking maneuvers, ambush tactics, and something they called controlled retreats that were designed to make the enemy overextend themselves. "Here's what I don't understand," said Lieutenant Commander Park Hygiene from the communications station. "Why didn't the other species try guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks, ASIC survival tactics?" The Veltharians' confusion was obvious, even through the translation system. "What do you mean by survival tactics?" Kixton asked. The humans exchanged glances. "Well," Han explained patiently, "when you're outnumbered, you don't fight where the enemy is strongest. You fight where they're weakest. You make them spread out, divide their forces. Force them to react to you instead of following their plan." "Learn this from your death world," Velmora whispered. "I learned this from being alive," Lee replied. "Every species on Earth that survived to reproduce had to figure out how to deal with bigger, stronger predators. The ones that didn't learn died out." Park studied the tactical display, her mind already working through dozens of possible scenarios. The Void Devourers might be individually stronger, but they're not smarter. They've never had to adapt because overwhelming force has always worked for them. "Till now," added Kim with a predatory smile that made the Veltharians nervous. As the briefing continued, the crystalline beings began to understand something that both fascinated and terrified. The humans weren't just analyzing the Void Devourers as a threat to be stopped. They were studying them like a problem to be solved, with the same methodical approach they might use to plan a dinner party or fix a broken machine. The galaxy's most feared predators had just become humanity's latest homework assignment. The first sign of the Void Devourer's arrival was the way space itself seemed to twist and darken. Reality rippled like water as hundreds of massive biomechanical ships tore through hyperspace. Their hungry minds focused on one thing: consumption. They had done this dance thousands of times before across the galaxy, and it always ended the same way: Elder Kixum watched from the safety of his underground bunker as the enemy fleet materialized in Veltharian space. The sight made his crystalline form dim with despair. There were so many of them, stretching across the star system like a plague of metal locusts. Each ship was the size of a small moon, covered in writhing organic components that pulsed with malevolent life. "They're even more terrifying than I remembered," whispered Velmora, her light flickering with terror. But something was different this time. Instead of finding a defenseless world ready for harvest, the Void Devourers encountered something they had never seen before. Organized Resistance Captain Kim Minho stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the enemy fleet with the calm focus of a predator sizing up its prey. His ship was positioned at the front of the human formation, exactly where he wanted to be. "All ships, this is Defiance Actual," he announced over the fleet communication system. "Remember, we're not here to match their numbers. What? We're here too. Make them think twice about picking on our new friends." The Void Devourers moved forward in their typical pattern, a massive wall of ships designed to overwhelm through sheer size. It was the same tactic that had worked against 17 different civilizations. But as they approached, the human fleet did something completely unexpected. They scattered. Lieutenant Commander Park, Ejin's voice crackled over the tactical frequency as she coordinated the defensive response. "Dragon Squadron, take the high. Approach. Phoenix Wing, come in low and fast. Remember, we're not trying to destroy them all at once. We're trying to make them angry." The Veltharians, watching from their monitoring stations, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Instead of forming a defensive line or attempting to flee, the humans were deliberately spreading out across the entire star system. Their small, fast ships darted between the massive Void Devourer vessels like insects around sleeping giants. "What are they doing?" Kixton asked in confusion. "They're making themselves vulnerable?" But as the battle unfolded, the aliens began to understand the human strategy. The Void Devourers, programmed to pursue and consume, automatically followed. The scattered human ships, their perfect formation, began to break apart as individual vessels peeled off to chase what they thought was easy prey. Park. Hijin's tactical display showed the enemy fleet spreading out exactly as planned. "Beautiful," she murmured. "They're taking the bait." The first real engagement came when 3 Void Devourer ships cornered a human cruiser near the system's outer asteroid belt. The aliens expected to see the small vessel destroyed instantly. Instead, they watched as the human ship led its pursuers directly into a carefully prepared ambush. "Now," Kim ordered. Suddenly, the asteroids themselves came alive with weapon fire. Human ships that had been hiding in the debris field opened up with coordinated volleys, catching the Void Devourers completely off guard. The biomechanical ships, designed to fight enemies that stood still and traded shots, found themselves unable to respond to the three-dimensional chess game the humans were playing. "How are they doing this?" Velmora gasped as she watched human fighters weave between enemy ships with impossible precision. The answer came as she observed the human pilots more closely. They weren't just following orders or reacting to threats. They were improvising, adapting, making split-second decisions that turned disadvantages into opportunities. When outnumbered, they used the enemy's size against them. When cornered, they found escape routes that shouldn't have existed. The Void Devourers had encountered their first opponent that refused to follow the script. The battle had been raging for 2 hours when Captain Osungwon made a decision that shocked every observer in the star system. His cruiser, the UES Thunderbolt, was heavily damaged and surrounded by 3 massive Void Devourer vessels. Instead of retreating or calling for backup, he did something that no rational species would even consider. "All hands, prepare for boarding. Action," he announced calmly over the ship's intercom. The Veltharians, monitoring the battle, couldn't believe what they were hearing. "He's going to board their ship?" Elmora gasped, her crystalline form flickering with disbelief. "That's suicide." But Captain O had grown up on Earth, where suicide and survival often looked identical to outsiders. He guided his damaged ship directly toward the largest Void Devourer vessel, using his remaining engines to ram straight into its hull. The impact sent shockwaves through both ships. But instead of destroying the human vessel, it created exactly what O had planned for: a breach in the enemy's armor. "Boarding teams, go, go, go," shouted as airlocks burst open and human soldiers poured into the enemy's ship like a flood. The Void Devourers had never experienced anything like this. Their hive mind was designed to consume and destroy from a distance, not to fight individual enemies inside their own vessels. The humans moved through the biomechanical corridors like they were born for this kind of close-quarters combat, turning every corner into a potential ambush point. Meanwhile, Commander Yunya Men was coordinating an even more insane strategy from his command ship. He had identified the Void Devourers' formation weakness. They relied on their massive size and thick armor to protect them from conventional weapons. So he decided to use their own size against them. "Attention all ships," Yoon's voice crackled over the communication system. "Execute ramming pattern Alpha. Repeat ramming pattern Alpha." The Voltharians watched in horror as human ships began deliberately crashing into enemy vessels. But these weren't desperate last stands. They were carefully calculated attacks designed to cause maximum damage while allowing the human crews to escape in the final seconds. "Are they insane?" Elder Kixton whispered as he watched a human destroyer ram straight into a Void Devourer's engine section, causing a massive explosion that disabled 3 enemy ships. "No," came the quiet voice of Science Officer Bae Sunmi over the communication. "Channel, they're from Earth." The difference became clear as the battle continued. What looked like reckless abandonment was actually precision timing, born from millions of years of evolution on a planet where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Every human pilot seemed to know exactly how much damage their ship could take before it became unsalvageable. They pushed their vessels to the absolute limit, then ejected to safety at the last possible moment. Captain O's boarding action was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. The Void Devourer's biomechanical systems, it's designed to function as a unified organism, began failing when faced with enemies that could think and adapt faster than the hive mind could respond. Human soldiers moved through the enemy ship like white blood cells attacking an infection, finding and destroying critical systems with surgical precision. "How do they know where to strike?" Velmora asked in amazement as she watched human troops systematically disable the enemy vessel's key components. The answer came from Lieutenant Commander Park Haijin, was analyzing the battle data in real time. They're reading the ships. Designed like a biological system. On Earth, if you want to survive, you learn to find the weak points in anything that might want to eat you. The Veltharians finally understood what they were witnessing. These weren't just soldiers or pilots. They were apex predators from a world that had spent eons teaching them that anything could be defeated if you were clever enough, fast enough, and willing to take risks that would terrify any sane species. The humans weren't fighting the Void Devourers like a military force. They were hunting them like prey. The turning point came when Admiral Park realized the Void Devourers had made a critical mistake. They had spread their forces too thin, chasing individual human ships, breaking their overwhelming formation into smaller, manageable groups. From her command ship, she watched the tactical display with the satisfaction of a chess master who had just seen her opponent fall into a carefully laid trap. "All ships, this is Admiral Park," she announced over the fleet-wide communication system. "Phase 2 is now in effect. Let's show them what happens when you corner a human." What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The scattered human ships suddenly stopped running and began converging on the separated Void Devourer groups. But this wasn't a simple counterattack. This was a coordinated assault that showcased everything that made humanity dangerous. Ensign Lee Min-jae was manning the weapons console of the cruiser. UES resilience when a Void Devourer plasma beam tore through their hull. The explosion threw him against the bulkhead, and when he got back to his feet, half his console was sparking, and the ship was losing atmosphere through a massive breach. "Engineering, we need power to weapons," he shouted into his headset. "Sorry." "Ensign," came the reply from Chief Engineer Wan Ju-yuk. "Main power is down, life support is failing, and we've got fires on 3 decks. We're running on emergency backup only." Any other species would have abandoned ship at this point. The resilience was dying. Her hull cracked open like an egg, and her systems failing one by one. But Lee just nodded and started rerouting power from non-essential systems. "Then we'll make backup power work," he said calmly, as if discussing the weather instead of imminent death. The Voltharians, watching from their monitoring stations, couldn't understand what they were seeing. "Why aren't they evacuating?" asked in confusion as she watched human crews continue fighting from ships that were barely holding together. The answer came from watching how the humans adapted to damage. When their main weapons failed, they used backup systems. When backup systems failed, they improvised with maintenance tools. When their ships lost power, they switched to manual controls. When their hulls were breached, they sealed themselves in emergency suits and kept fighting. On the resilience, Ensign Lee had managed to jury-rig his weapons console using parts from the coffee maker, the ship's communication system, and something he'd borrowed from the medical bay. His makeshift weapon array shouldn't have worked according to any known laws of physics, but it was putting out a steady stream of fire that kept 3 Void Devourer ships at bay. "Ensign, your ship is falling apart," Captain Kim's voice crackled through the damaged communication system. "Why are you still fighting?" Lee looked around at his devastated bridge, where his crewmates were working frantically to keep their dying ship operational. "Because we're not dead yet, sir. As long as we're not dead, we're dangerous." This simple philosophy was being repeated across the entire human fleet. Ships that should have been destroyed hours ago continued fighting with determination that bordered on the supernatural. The Void Devourers, programmed to expect surrender once they inflicted sufficient damage, found themselves facing an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation grew more desperate. The hive mind began to experience something it had never encountered before: doubt. Their consumption algorithm couldn't process an enemy that treated destruction as a minor setback rather than a defeat. When human ships were damaged, they didn't retreat. They used their damage as a weapon, ramming enemy vessels with their broken hulls, or using their leaking power systems to create improvised explosives, Admiral. Park watched the enemy formation begin to waver and knew they had one. The Void Devourers were retreating, their hive mind unable to calculate victory against opponents who refused to accept defeat. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute refusal to give up. Even when giving up was the sensible thing to do, the silence that followed the Void Devourers' retreat was unlike anything the Voltharians had experienced in their long history. For the first time in months, their home system was quiet. No screaming, alarms, no sounds of destruction, no desperate evacuation calls. Just peace, bought with human blood and stubbornness. Elder Kix then emerged from his underground bunker to find human ships scattered throughout Voltharian space. Many of them held together by what appeared to be spare parts and sheer willpower. The sight both amazed and terrified him. These beings had just accomplished something that 17 other civilizations had failed to do. They were treating it like a successful day at the office. "Admiral Park," he transmitted to the human. "Command ship, we cannot find words to express our gratitude. You have saved our entire species." Admiral Park's image appeared on the communication screen, and Kixton was surprised to see she looked tired rather than triumphant. "We're just glad we could help, Elder. Though I have to ask, are you sure you want us to stick around? We're not exactly the peaceful neighbors you're probably used to." That question had been troubling the Voltharian leadership since the battle ended. They had called for legendary protectors and received exactly what they asked for. But watching the humans fight had been like watching natural disasters with military training. These beings didn't just defeat enemies. They dismantled them with a casual efficiency that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. "We would be honored to have you as allies," Kix then replied carefully, "though we admit we're still processing what we witnessed today." The truth was, the Voltharians were having long discussions about whether they had solved one problem only to create another. The humans had shown incredible kindness in coming to their aid, but they had also demonstrated capabilities that made them potentially more dangerous than the Void Devourers. Admiral Park seemed to understand their concerns. "I'm going to leave. Commander Young Mingi here to establish our first embassy. She's our best diplomat, and she'll help coordinate any future defense needs you might have." Commander Young arrived 3 days later aboard a transport ship that looked like it had been through several wars. Considering it was human-built, it probably had. It was a small woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile that somehow made the Veltharians feel both safer and more nervous at the same time. The important thing to understand, Jung explained to the Veltharian Council during their first meeting, is that humans don't want to conquer or control anyone. We just don't like bullies, and if someone were to threaten us again, Velmora asked. Jung's smile never wavered, but something in her eyes made the crystalline beings shiver. Then they'd learn why the Void Devourers decided to find easier prey. Word of humanity's victory spread quickly through the galaxy's communication networks. Species that had lived in terror of the Void Devourers for generations suddenly found themselves with new hope. But that hope came with a price, the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy there was now a species that could make the universe's most feared predators retreat in confusion. The Veltharians had performed their summoning ritual in desperation, calling for legendary protectors to save them from extinction. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, though they were beginning to understand that the most effective protectors were often the ones who had learned to survive in places where protection was just another word for controlled violence. As Elder Kixlin watched human ships patrolling his system, he made a mental note to be much more careful about ancient rituals in the future. The next time they needed help, he would definitely read the fine print about Deathworld species. But for now, for the first time in months, the Veltharians could sleep peacefully, knowing they were protected by the galaxy's most dangerous babysitters.